King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and the Holy Grail, the myth around the enigmatic king of the Britons is unrivaled in its vibrancy.
The question of who King Arthur was he real, man or myth, has occupied scholars and thinkers for centuries.
He alone was able to pull the magical sword Excalibur from the stone. In the battle against the Saxons, it is he who determines the outcome. His court at Camelot is home to the noblest of knights, the most beautiful women. Exuberant festivities pay homage to his splendor and fame, and his reputation as a just regent precedes him.
He is, purely and simply, the most dazzling figure of an idealized medieval era.
From early on, King Arthur is suspected of being a construct of pure invention. Nobody can say where he lived or died, nor where he is buried. He's a phantom. Who or what then lies behind the myth? An old historic chronicle may hold the key to the solution. The tale of King Arthur is set in Britain after 500 BC. Dark times. The Romans have left the island. The various small kingdoms are at war, and Germanic tribes invade the land. It is in this bleak epoch, according to legend, that 15-year-old Arthur steps onto the scene and becomes king of the Britons. Magical powers and his teacher, the wizard Merlin, make it possible.
My king,
Mordred,
I'm pleased at your return.
King Arthur is renowned for being strong and fearless, a clever strategist. He spearheads his warriors through years of battles in defense of Britain. He embodies hope for the hardship-riddled people.
I am King Arthur, Uther Pendragon's son, your ruler by divine grace. The Saxons have attacked our land, our fields destroyed, our women raped, our children kidnapped. The Lord our Savior has sent us these heathens now to prove our faith and to put our courage to the test.
He's that ideal ruler, that model of kingship, so we can think about qualities of kingship, of leadership, and ideas of war and chivalry and honor and nobility, and these kinds of timeless themes that makes writers want to return to the Arthurian legend over time.
King Arthur reportedly went to war against the Saxons 12 times. He eventually brought it to a close at Mons Badonicus. In this final battle, legend claims that he alone killed many hundred men. Sounds like fake news. What is the real story?
Central to the Arthurian saga is a historical event, the retreat of the Romans from Britain. Subsequently, you have the situation that the Roman-British population had to defend themselves against usurpers, the Saxons. They moved inland from the east in several spurts. It is Arthur who stops the Saxon advances in many great battles.
Arthur soon gains fame as a victorious warrior, as evident in orally transmitted Welsh sagas and stories. It isn't until the 9th century that we find written mention of him in a text on British history penned by a monk named Nennius. But the myth of Arthur originates in another text, a king's chronicle that makes Arthur pivotal, written between 1135 and 1138. The author is Geoffrey of Monmouth, presumably a clergyman like Nennius. Geoffrey collects anything he can find about his hero. Where sources leave gaps, he invents new traits, episodes, and venues. His contemporary colleagues are quick to criticize his work. They describe some episodes as lies, but they never doubt Arthur's actual existence. Geoffrey's so-called Historia Regum Britanniae is meant to be a history of Britain's earliest kings, with all the features: wars, love, murder, and battles for the throne. There are over 100 names on the list of kings, amongst them such illustrious ones as Brutus, King Lear, Constantine the Great, and King Arthur. But he represents a new departure. He is the first to rule over a peaceful and united Britain. Or that is what the author would have us believe. Modern research still sees Geoffrey's historical depiction as too fantastical to be true. But in the 12th century, his Historia is one of the most popular chronicles.
The book rather quickly achieved great circulation. Around 200 manuscripts of it still exist today. We only have single copies of other medieval works, many for which no manuscripts exist anymore. So 200 is a lot, and there must have been many more.
Naturally, the historical chronicle turns Arthur into an outstanding hero and a stellar sovereign. The figure embodies the ideal of a medieval ruler, and other attributes are added on, including those of courtly ideals. The idea of the round table, meaning that he is the first among equals, an ideal head of state whose rule is not dictatorial, but collective with his knights. Those are aspects that developed in medieval times and have remained relevant and interesting to this day.
Time and again, researchers have tried to find a historic figure that Arthur is based on. According to one theory, it may have been Roman commander Lucius Artorius Castus. Artorius was likely stationed in Britain during the 2nd century. The next Roman who comes into consideration is Ambrosius Aurelianus. He's reputed to have led a Roman-British army into the legendary battle at Mons Badonicus in the 5th century. In doing so, he managed to halt the advance of the Saxons. The third famous Roman to repeatedly turn up in the research goes by the name of Riotamus. He too is a commander during the 5th century and is reputed to have died in 470 in a battle against the Goths. Another popular proposition is that of the bear man, Athos, the Celtic word for bear. That would have made him a Celtic warrior who led the fight against the Saxons. But upon closer examination, none of these theories can be verified.
There are many questions when it comes to considering Arthur as a historic figure. His name lends itself to certain connections, and researchers have sought these intensively in all historical sources. A second means of identification might be to look for historical figures that were such exemplary rulers.
Eine herausragende Führungsrolle gespielt haben.
And it transpires that Arthur is an amalgamation of many different parts. So what we have here are various elements and names, the different rulers, that become the ingredients that are then blended together to create a new single entity.
Und dann ein Ganzes ergeben.
Even the family tree spanning 2,000 years that Geoffrey creates for Arthur is purely fictitious. The author claims that Arthur's lineage can be traced back to the mythical Trojan Aeneas. The lineage then includes his great-grandson Brutus, who came to Britain and named it Land of Brutus. And even Arthur's father is fictitious. How then can Arthur truly have existed? Especially as he is described from the very beginning as a mythical hero, as possessing superhuman strength, defeating dragons, monsters, and giants. And he has a teacher named Merlin, who is a wizard. It is he who paves the boy's way to the throne. Geoffrey also describes Arthur as a medieval knight, with a golden helmet, a shield with the image of the Virgin Mary, with a lance and sword. And he even has a clear idea about his place of birth. The village of Tintagel on the rugged western coast of Cornwall. According to Geoffrey, Arthur is conceived and born there, the extramarital offspring of King Uther Pendragon. Thousands of Arthur fans congregate at the ruined castle by the sea each year, regardless of the fact that research has clearly shown that Arthur could not have lived there. It wasn't built until the year 1230. Archaeologists have unearthed the remains of a settlement dating from the 5th or 6th century. This might have inspired Geoffrey. If King Arthur never actually existed, what else is hidden by the myth? The track leads us to the Anglo-Norman royal family. At the time of Geoffrey's writing, the kingdom is in political crisis. The Normans have been in power for around 70 years. They stem from Scandinavian pirates that raided the coasts of Europe for decades, including those of northern France. After a bitter defeat, they reach an agreement with the French king and gain their own principality. They named this new region, for their origins, Normandy.
The Normans were descended from Viking settlers who came to Normandy in the northwest of France in the early 10th century, and over time assimilated with the Franks. They adopted their language, their religion, and created a very strong principality which maintained a degree of independence from the Franks.
This skill to assimilate and react pragmatically, that is the big advantage of the Normans, which leads them to found many successful states.
In October 1066, the Norman Duke William I manages to take the British crown. His fleet crosses the Channel and defeats the Anglo-Saxons at the Battle of Hastings. From this date forwards, William is King of Britain as well as Duke of Normandy. He makes history as William the Conqueror and is renowned as the founder of the Anglo-Norman royal family. In 1135, Stephan von Blois ascends to the throne. He's the grandson of William the Conqueror. His cousin Matilda also claims rights of succession. A fight over the throne ensues between these two, one that will continue for almost 20 years and will cause great upheaval in the land.
Geoffrey's writing at a time of war, and we could see the appeal of a strong, wise leader who brings people under him and to him during this time of devastation and strife. And Geoffrey's history can allow the Normans to see themselves as the successors to Arthur.
It is Stephan von Blois who discovers Arthur for himself and claims him to be the ancestor of the Anglo-Norman dynasty. The mythical ruler of Britain is the ideal figure to help him legitimize his claim to the throne.
In this situation, he apparently needs something akin to a dynastic foundation. And this dynastic foundation, in turn, is given by the Historia Regum Britanniae, likely commissioned by Stephan von Blois. And he probably used the story of Arthur, which was already well known, to fortify his own reign and to strengthen his own genealogy. It is definitely a work of clear intention and a very clear idea. And one could use the term propaganda to describe this idea.
the Normans as idealized rulers of Britain? Researchers think it to be possible. At the very least, Geoffrey allows the legendary sovereign and the Norman rulers to merge.
Stephen might have seen himself in King Arthur, Arthur as an ideal ruler, an exemplar of Norman values and courtliness, and he may have imagined his own court as a place that reflects Arthur's court, its excellence, its splendor, its nobility, the sophistication of its knights and ladies. This would be something that Stephen could imagine for himself.
The reader stands to find out little about the private life of King Arthur. He marries Guinevere, who is from a noble Roman family, as Geoffrey would have it. The wedding takes place in the aftermath of a battle against the Saxons. Various stories circulate about Guinevere, some linking her to old Celtic legends. She is the White Fairy, a malevolent traitor, a weak but chaste woman, but Arthur always loves her with all his heart.
Guinevere. Good morning, my beloved.
When we look at Arthur's immediate family situation, all seems well initially. Once he is established as a ruler, he has a wife, an ideal wife, Guinevere. This woman, just like Arthur, he is the radiant hero, she is immensely beautiful. It's a great fit.
When Geoffrey describes life at Arthur's court, he is in fact describing the Norman court. The clergy teach the young nobles that live there. It is about the history of Britain, courtly behavior and religion, and new things. Latin is taught, as well as Old English, the language of the subjugated Anglo-Saxons.
Gentlemen, repeat after me the Our Father. Evotha thin villa.
Evotha thin villa.
On orsan swaswa on heavenon.
On orsan swaswa on heavenon.
Arthur's nephew Mordred is one of the elite students. According to the legend, he is faithful to his king and followed him into many battles.
Mordred, just you now.
The Norman mother tongue that they bring to Britain is French. But conquerors and conquered both adapt. And gradually, English and French begin to mix. Within a few decades, a new language comes about, Anglo-Norman.
We see the influence of the Norman culture still today. Words like court, government, these are French language words. And so the Normans brought with them their French language, and this shaped the history of the English language and English as we know it today.
My faithful knights, we have finally won. The enemy is banished, and the land is secured. Let us feast. There is a time to fight, but now's the time for celebration. Mordred, my nephew, you are like a son to me.
My king, your gown.
At a time when only a minority could read and write, language is particularly important. Every word the king spoke was significant. Medieval times are an epoch of language, figurative symbols and gestures. It is the detailed descriptions of battles that lend such credence to Geoffrey's Chronicles. Its huge success can also be explained by the fact that he uses a popular trick. Geoffrey sets Arthur's story in the 6th century, but he embeds it in the 12th century events.
This is a common strategy for medieval authors to recount their material against the background of their own time. This means that what they recount, even if it was a long time ago, is described in such a way as if it were happening in their present. And in Geoffrey's account of Arthur, we can see that in details like items of clothing or the feasts that he describes.
There is even speculation that William the Conqueror could be the source for Geoffrey's Arthur. This would hold true for the story of Arthur's ancestry. Both William and legendary Arthur are born out of wedlock. They are derided as bastards and have little hope of ascending to the throne, yet they both do. The descriptions of the armor and weapons in Geoffrey's work also mirror the Norman world of the 12th century. What this looked like can be seen on the Bayeux tapestry. It eternalizes the Norman conquest of Britain at the Battle of Hastings in 1066, depicted in great detail over a length of almost 70 meters, a kind of medieval comic strip. William the Conqueror's mounted troops in heavy armor, equipped with lance, sword, and shield. This is the author's visual inspiration when he tells of Arthur and his battling knights. The victory at the Battle of Hastings is achieved by the Normans' massive attacks and their extensive cavalry. The Anglo-Saxons fight as they have always done, on foot. They have nothing to defend them against the riders with their long lances. The defeat at Hastings seals the doom of the Anglo-Saxon kings in Britain. The Normans take the scepter in hand and change the country fundamentally. The loot is divided amongst the victorious, and knights are rewarded with fiefdoms. These bind them in duty to their king, whom they serve as vassals. First and foremost, this means faithfully following their king into battle unpaid.
These were successful times. Now you are to be rewarded. Cardor, I give you Cornwall, with all its villages, castles, fields, and forests as fiefdom.
I thank you, my king.
You, Gawain, take Maine. Rule justly.
My king, I thank you.
Kay, I give you Anjou.
You humble me. I thank you, my king.
Das Herrschaftssystem,
This system of rule works mainly through giving and taking.
also der König,
So the king gives something,
gibt
like goods or precious items and the like, and he gains fealty.
Treue. Das finden wir im
That is what we see around the rulers in this British-Norman realm.
britisch-normannischen Reichs. Genau dasselbe.
And naturally, we find the same model in Geoffrey's story of Arthur.
Auch dort
Here, too, it is King Arthur who gives.
In return, I expect fealty from all of you. And then troops to fight all my future wars with. Can I count on you?
For the Normans, the distribution of the conquered lands did not suffice to secure their power. That's why William had his claim set in stone. What follows is a castle-building boom, initiated by the new king in Britain, in order to secure his rule both inwards and outwards for the long term. By the end of the 12th century, at least 500 fortifications have been built in Britain. They not only serve as secure housing for nobility, but also act as administrative centers in the conquered regions. There are to be more than 50 kilometers between them, the distance that a knight can travel in a single day. towns eventually developed around many of these castles that still characterize Britain today, amongst them Hastings, Cambridge and Nottingham. Some of the best-known Norman castles are the Tower of London and Dover Castle in the southeast of England. At Dover Castle, one of the most important Norman structures, artisans and historians have spent thousands of hours reconstructing the inner rooms of the Great Tower. The result is a scientifically exact copy of the medieval furnishings.
Castles seem to us perhaps to be rather cold and dark places, and they probably were, but there were ways in which they were made to be comfortable and colorful for their medieval inhabitants. Importantly, the hall would have a large fireplace which would provide light and heat to the room. Tapestries would be hung on the walls. These would be decorative. They would be full of color, but they would also provide insulation to the room to keep things warm.
A luxury the broad masses of the British populace could only dream of. The castles housed only the elites of the land, and they celebrated there too. Descriptions of the life at court and especially of its celebrations make up a large part of Geoffrey's chronicle. He describes customs and rituals that came from France and can be proven to have been introduced by the Normans. When the king issues an invitation, his vassals leave their castles and make their way to the royal court. The festivities are opulent and last for days. Tournaments are fought, chess is played, music is made, and there is abundant eating and drinking.
We see this courtly culture in Geoffrey of Monmouth's story of King Arthur, with Arthur holding court and many festivities during his reign at times of peace. He has the most excellent knights, the most beautiful and eloquent ladies. Arthur's court is a place of magnificence, of splendor, and of sophistication, and this very much reflected the courtly culture of Geoffrey's own time.
In terms of fashion, the members of the royal family are the influencers of their day. Their clothes are scrutinized and talked about.
My queen? My queen?
They should be colorful, the materials precious.
Is this dress to your liking? Or should it be the one with the golden collar?
In the Middle Ages, gowns of brocade, velvet or precious silk are prized, particularly if they are richly embroidered and decorated with golden platelets. Belts, ribbons and veils round out the style of the nobles.
You should bring me the white dress, the one with the veil. Of course.
There are strict rules as to who can wear what. Gowns, jewels and hairstyles, nothing is left to an individual's taste. A person's outfit in the Middle Ages is predominantly a visual marker of their social standing, especially so at a royal festival.
Festivals could be displays of power, but also places where one could enact politics. There'd be opportunities for networking, for meeting important nobles or officials at these events, so they were opportunities at festivals for political engagement, as well as for ceremony and activity.
What about me? Did I not show fealty? Prove myself in battle? Why was no land given to me?
You are not ready yet. But never fear, your time will come. The Scots in the north are disruptive. One day you will be the one to keep them in check. Kay and Gawain are on the mainland and far from court. They are concerned with their own affairs and won't cause me any trouble.
Cador, Kay and Gawain are your closest vassals. You do not trust them?
Yes, I do. But all three are hungry for power and don't like each other. I want no conflict here at court, just followers I can trust completely.
As you say.
Mordred, your place is here, at my side. Now let's talk about the feast. Important guests are coming. We must forge alliances.
Then as now, without the necessary alliances and skilled diplomacy, a sovereign cannot rule successfully.
Naturally, festivities at the royal court are central to making connections. one is able to display one's power and the role that one plays. In research, we use the term rules of the game of politics. These come into play predominantly at the courtly celebrations.
For a successful feast, the royal kitchens serve up all they have. Preparations take days. A minimum of 5 courses are on the menu. Local produce, like grain and vegetables, are often taxes paid by the farmers of the region. Exotic wares are bought from traders. White bread is considered particularly noble, but also meat, poultry, and fresh fruit are essential for a royal feast. While the ruler takes advantage of the festivities to assure himself of the fealty of his noblemen, they in turn use the opportunity to secure lucrative positions. Geoffrey sheds light into the administrative system of Britain in 1135. It was introduced by William the Conqueror, first and foremost to calculate taxation, though it also allowed him to discover the number of young men available for armed conscription. Only his most trusted followers were appointed to run the administration. At the National Archives in London, we find a document dubbed the Domesday Book, in medieval spelling, Domesday Book. It dates back to 1086 and is considered to be the oldest land registry in the world. It lists everything that is part of the Anglo-Norman realm, literally everything. On nearly 900 pages, we find names and holdings of over 1,000 villages and towns. Under Hanley in Worcestershire, William's agents noted, for example, 20 inhabitants, 17 farmers, 17.5 units of land, 9 servants, 6 pig herds of 60 pigs, 1 mill, woods, and a falconry. All these possessions are transferred to the king. He awards the church a quarter and retains a fifth for himself. More than half is distributed amongst the Norman barons. The Anglo-Saxon nobles are left with a mere 3%. Tilting the ownership structure in favor of the Normans is not merely a politically strategic move by the conqueror, it also makes him rich. And that's not all. He's paving the way for a centralized state, as everything noted in the Domesday Book is declared legally binding.
The Domesday Book was unprecedented, not seen anywhere else in Europe. It changed the way that land was organized and governed, and the way that the king inherited wealth from the property that he owned and that his men and nobles ran for him. Still today, the Queen owns much of the land in England and Britain. This all is an inheritance of William's feudal system and his taxation, which is recorded in the Domesday Book.
In Geoffrey's writing, according positions and lands is also Arthur's key to remaining in power. Privately, however, a pall lies over his fortunes. After 9 years of marriage, the royal couple still have no offspring. And Mordred secretly woes Guinevere.
It seems we need a counterweight like that, an opposing figure to the ideal hero. And perhaps this character is also needed to indicate that Arthur's realm had its negative aspects as well. And of course, these stories serve to fascinate the reader and keep people interested. A typical situation like this keeps us reading. Sex and crime work nowadays, and was also something that also hooked people of the medieval courts.
My faithful knights! We have won, finally! The enemy is dispersed. The land is secured. Let us feast!
Long live King Arthur!
Long live the king! Long live the king! There is a time for fighting And there is a time to celebrate victory. You have fought bravely. Mordred, my nephew, you are like a son to me. You have proven yourself courageous in battle. We drink to your health.
I thank you, my king. But it is your courage that puts all else to shame. To your health, and that of the queen. That you may soon be blessed with a son and heir. Long live King Arthur. Long live King Arthur. Long live King Arthur.
Geoffrey does not comment on the flirt between Guinevere and Mordred, but he does generally criticize salaciousness and lethargy as they threaten the peace. A premonition that might come true as messengers arrive at Arthur's legendary court, the castle later known as Camelot. The author places it in the City of Legions in Wales. This City of Legions, in Welsh Caethion, is a major Roman military site until around 300 BC. In the 11th century, the Normans built a castle here. It's no coincidence that Geoffrey chooses this site. It's a mere 40 kilometers from his birthplace. He knows the region like the back of his hand.
One of the really interesting things about Geoffrey of Monmouth's work is that it gives Carleon a really strong role, a strong part within the story. It features disproportionately, really, within a history of Britain. And archaeology has since shown that many of the great structures that the Romans had built, the amphitheatre in which we're standing, the great archway, a tower at the centre of the fortress, and the baths, were still standing, actually, in Geoffrey of Monmouth's day. He writes in the text that it was eminently suitable for such a ceremony to hold court here.
The amphitheatre prompts an entirely new aspect of the Arthurian myth, the Round Table.
And of course, Carleon has this great elliptical or circular bowl-shaped feature in the landscape, and very soon it became linked with the Round Table, and this field became known as Round Table Field.
Geoffrey himself does not use the term Round Table. He merely describes that Arthur and his knights confer in a circular room in the tower. But some experts deduce that this scene inspired later poets. It is still during Geoffrey's lifetime, around 20 years after his royal chronicle, that a Norman author translates the story into Anglo-Norman and includes the Round Table. The idea? A radiant king amidst his noble knights at a round table. All are of equal rank and honor. Only the very best and bravest men may be seated here. It is a close-knit community that decides in unison on how Camelot is to be ruled. An ideal medieval image, in theory at least.
The Round Table is a device that shares out leadership broadly. It's also an element that is egalitarian, or claims to be so. Of course, Arthur is the ruler. He is still primus inter pares. But then, everyone else is on equal footing. And yet the epic poems about Arthur show that this can also lead to envy and resentment. Who sits closest to the sovereign? Who on his right? Who is the best knight?
Envoys from Rome have sought me out. They have declared me to be a usurper. I'm supposed to learn my true place. They call my sovereignty in Britain into question. They demand the repossession of all conquered lands and demand our subjection. Be calm.
Rome feels threatened by Arthur and demands his submission as a vassal. Geoffrey's episode alludes to the medieval conflict between the Anglo-Norman and French royal houses. Starting with William the Conqueror, the Norman kings of Britain are simultaneously Dukes of Normandy, and as such, vassals to the King of France. But the Norman rulers refused to acknowledge this.
Let me hear your opinions.
Such iniquity begs only one response. War. Let us show these Romans who we are.
We have celebrated enough. It is time now to turn to war.
We Britons, we're no cowards. We are fighters. I say we go to war.
Rome is said to have conscripted over 460,000 soldiers. Arthur is willing to meet this foe. He can put his trust in his faithful warriors and knights. The Normans are the first to know professional soldiers.
It becomes clear that the contemporary and strictly organized feudal system works better and brings military advantages. Because this strict system is organized in such a way that there are professional soldiers integrated into the system and that they are very specialized. In this case, men on horseback. Later, they become Ritter, in German, from Reiter, rider.
At the peak of his powers and at a time of peace, Arthur takes a momentous decision, convinced that it will save Britain.
Right. That I shall come to Rome. I shall come to Rome. But not to subject myself, but to conquer.
Long live King Arthur! Long live King Arthur! Long live King Arthur!
Mordred, you shall stand in for me in my absence. I trust the land to you, and I leave my queen under your protection.
I thank you, and I won't disappoint you. You have my word. I shall defend the land and the queen with my life.
But Arthur shares William's fate. Every time the Normans left the island to fight in France, traitors attempted to usurp the throne in Britain. Traitors from amongst his most trusted men. In Arthur's case, it is his nephew Mordred who forges an ominous plan.
When Arthur left the country, he can claim the throne that he believes is his to take. But as we see, the right of succession is against him and disqualifies him as a rightful ruler. He could only ever share the rule, but that is not enough for him. And from this point of view, that problem can only be solved by treason.
Mordred, like Arthur and Guinevere, is a figure with an obscure past. In some depictions, he is Arthur's son, in others his nephew. And wizard Merlin predicts that he will one day sit on Arthur's throne. There are also many versions of his love for Guinevere. In some legends, she reciprocates his oaths of love. In other versions, he pulls her from the throne and violates her.
Arthur, when he goes to conquer Rome, leaves his kingdom in the hands of his nephew Mordred, but this turns out to be a crucial mistake because Mordred betrays him, he takes his crown, usurps the throne, and also takes his wife Guinevere. So Arthur perhaps should have left his kingdom in more trusty hands, a lesson to be learned here. Do not leave your kingdom unless you are sure that it is going to be held stably by those who you appoint to succeed you.
When Arthur hears of Mordred's betrayal, he swiftly returns to Britain with his army. In 542, a decisive and murderous battle ensues. Mordred is killed. Arthur is severely wounded by one of Mordred's allies, the British kingdom seems doomed. The king's last remaining vassals, so Geoffrey, take their liege to the mythical island of Avalon. There his wounds are to be tended to. Whether or not the king survives is not told. What remains is the Britons' hope that their ruler might one day return. With the demise of preeminent King Arthur, Britain succumbs to chaos. Geoffrey depicts the return of the Saxons, who finally assume power. From the courtly poet's perspective, this could have been avoided if Arthur and Mordred had maintained inner peace. According to the researchers, Geoffrey's comment can be understood in clear reference to Britain's political situation in 1135.
There's a warning, however, at the end of Geoffrey's history to the Normans that if they also sin, if they do not solve the civil war, if they cannot achieve peace, cannot come out of this, then their kingdom may suffer the devastation and loss that the Britons' kingdom suffered as well.
This warning might allude to the battle for the throne between King Stefan and his cousin Matilda. The so-called anarchy had the royal household in its grip for many years. It isn't until after Stefan's death that Matilda's son Henry II hails a new era. But Geoffrey's critique does not diminish King Arthur's popularity.
Geoffrey of Monmouth's story of Arthur was hugely influential in the medieval period and long after it. And even long after Geoffrey wrote, when King Stephen, William the Conqueror, and others are no longer in power, writers are still telling the story of Arthur, and Arthur's legend still holds a strong appeal for readers and writers, in which he is a warrior king and an ideal ruler, an example of good, strong leadership.
The publication of Geoffrey's book creates an avalanche. Many authors discover the legendary king for themselves and continue to weave his tale imaginatively. Just 20 years after the King's Chronicle, the poet Weiss pens his Roman de Brut in Anglo-Norman with the addition of the Round Table. French poet Chrétien de Troyes, in turn, names the knights Lancelot and Percival and incorporates the Holy Grail into Arthur's saga. In Robert Boron's work of around 1200, we first find the sword in the stone. In Germany, it is mainly the writings of Hartmann von Aue and Wolfram von Eschenbach's famous Parzival that make Arthur popular. Geoffrey's Anglo-Norman King Arthur thus becomes progressively obscured. His hero is transformed incessantly. From a strong, wise, and just king, he morphs even into a Christian savior. Many rulers yearn to benefit from his splendor. Richard the Lionheart, who named his sword Excalibur, is the first in a long line of British sovereigns who try to trace their ancestry back to Arthur at all costs. Even Maximilian I of Habsburg, the last knight, has a larger-than-life bronze statue of Arthur cast for his tomb in the court's church. Henry VIII had himself depicted as Arthur at the Round Table. The picture hangs in Winchester Hall. In 1848, Queen Victoria commissions her dressing room in Westminster Palace to be decorated with images from the saga. And Prince Charles has Arthur as one of his middle names, as does his son William and his grandson Louis. Researchers continue to search for traces of Arthur's existence to this day, though most of them don't believe in a real Arthur. For them, he is simply the personification of an ideal medieval ruler. Each author creates their own Arthurian world, and often real events and real people shine through. In Geoffrey's telling, it could be the Anglo-Norman rulers.